Once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. Life for Christians in Iraq and Syria are considerably worse under ISIS. Both Pope Francis and Patriarch Kirill, the Russian Orthodox leader, condemned the persecution of the Christian community in the region this past week. And earlier this month, the EU Parliament issued, finally, a resolution declaring ISIS's action a religious genocide. So why is the U.S. State Department so reluctant to designate this a Christian genocide? Joining me now is Nina Shea. She's the director of the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute. She just wrote a blockbuster piece on this topic for National Review. Nina, thanks for coming back.
Thank you, Raymond.
Give me a sense of what is the reluctance? Why are they so painfully avoiding what is so obvious to the world?
Well, it's obviously political reasons because they've gone through thrown out a number of hurdles for us to address. They said we can't do it because we have no evidence of intent. That ISIS means to kill Christians.
Yeah, what does that mean? They said they have no evidence of intent. We've got dead bodies piled up. We've got people fleeing.
We have videos where they boast that they are beheading Christians because they're Christian. And there's written statements saying that they're going to break your crosses and enslave your women with a picture of St. Peter's with a black flag over it instead of a cross. And of course, most of the Christians in Iraq are Catholic of one kind or another, the Syriac or the Chaldean, and there's a lot of Orthodox as well.
Why, given all the reportage that you have done over the years, aid to the Church in Need, the Vatican Fides, all the various organs, why is the State Department relying exclusively on a report by the Holocaust Museum? It's a 28-page report. First of all, what is this and why is it a problem?
Yeah, this is a 28-page trip report. The trip was done in September, and the State Department said they were relying on this report that was just released in October. So it was a very...
The State Department doesn't have its own people on the ground? They don't have their own investigators?
Of course they do. And they have a whole office on religious freedom and bureaus on the Middle East.
Which you sat on for several years.
Oh, yes, the Commission on Religious Freedom. So they have lots of resources. They chose to pin it on one because they wanted a certain outcome. And actually, some of those people who did the report for the Holocaust Museum worked in the administration before they went to the museum. So you just have to wonder if there was some collusion there and whether that was, advanced, they wanted a certain outcome.
And they don't have a problem saying Yazidis are being...
Right. Another ancient religion in the Middle East, they said, and of course it is, they suffered very, very badly at the hands of ISIS. There were thousands enslaved, 1,000 or more killed. But they're willing to say that Yazidis are victims of genocide, but they're not willing, they're silent on Christian genocide. And I really think that part of the problem, Raymond, is that we're seeing a repetition of what happened during the Jewish Holocaust, which is that there's a fear of feeding into the enemy propaganda. In this case, it's a crusader war. In the case of the Jewish Holocaust, it's that the Allies were working on or intervening on behalf of the Jews. And so Roosevelt chose to remain silent, and it was catastrophic for the Jewish community. And this will be catastrophic for the Christian community.
What difference would it make if tomorrow the State Department came out and declared that this is indeed a Holocaust befalling the Christians in Iraq, in Syria, and other parts of the Middle East?
There are limited amounts of humanitarian aid, of generosity on the part of a very tired community of donors, and they're going to give to the group that they feel is suffering genocide. So if people come forward and say, well, there's the government, U.S. government comes forward and says, the Yazidis are facing genocide, the Christians aren't. Or just silent on the Christians, and no one really understands what's happening to them until it's too late.
Now, State Department officials tell me that the Genocide Convention has a clear statement, and it requires that the states act to prevent and protect victims of genocide, and that is where the reluctance to declare this a genocide might reside.
They may have a reluctance to act as well, And they're arguing that they don't want to send American troops storming in to save the Christians in Nineveh. Actually, we're already involved there. We have a military engagement. They wouldn't have to do anything. The convention does not prescribe any specific acts. And you can protect Christians in other ways and minorities in other ways. For example, letting them into our country for a refugee resettlement. We are bringing in 10,000 Syrian refugees this year. In the first quarter of fiscal year 16, we brought in basically one Christian family with six Syrian Christians from Syria. It's equivalent to one family.
And why do you think, given what we've seen, I mean, and as you say, since the Paris attacks, 2 Syrian Christian refugees, 602 Muslims have been allowed in the United States.
Yeah.
Why so few Christians? Given that the creators of this violence seem to be Islamic, not Christian.
Well, there's a reason for this, and I've delved into it and I've written about it. It's because the UN refers our refugees to us. And so it's only referring the Muslims who are living in the UN camps. Now, why don't Christians seek shelter in UN camps? Because they're too dangerous for them. And we're seeing some of this in Europe now with the migrants, where Germany is now saying, well, we've got to separate the Christians out from the Muslims because they're being preyed upon, by extremists that have mingled into that community. And the same thing happens in the Middle East.
The other argument I keep hearing from folks at the State Department vis-a-vis this declaration of genocide toward Christians, they say, look, ISIS gives Christians an option.
Yeah.
They can either convert or pay the jizya.
Yeah.
Now, the jizya is a tax. And they say, when you have this option, it's not a genocide, Nina Shea. You would say what?
Yeah, there's no evidence that it is an option, that there is any sign of Christian life at all anywhere in this so-called caliphate. So whether you're in Syria and Raqqa, or you're in Mosul or Nineveh in Iraq, there's no priests, there's no churches that are open. The churches have been destroyed or desecrated. There are no congregations assembling. No. There's no sign of Christian life.
And the bishops on the ground tell us.
The bishops on the ground, they said, look, it really was not a real offer. In fact, they made, the ISIS militants, when the bishops talked to them, made leering comments about the Christian girls. So they really, there was no trust there. And even President Obama's own counterterrorism official at the State Department, who's just left in the past year, he has said that this is just a publicity stunt by ISIS. This is a caliphate, the Islamic State publicity stunt to make them look like they're following a rule of law under the Koran. They're not. I mean, they do what they will.
Let's return to this question for a moment of refugees. ISIS has committed to sending terrorists in amid the refugees. Is that a reason for us to strengthen the screening and be doubly sure who's coming in? And are you concerned that we don't have those checks in place today?
Well, I think that we do have some checks in place. I'm not sure about the borders, but I'm from the UN Refugee Resettlement Program. I think we do have the checks in place. This is not the migration that we're seeing in Europe, where people have fake passports and no ID papers, and whoever just shows up is sort of admitted. They don't know what to do with them. But there has to be a long and really deliberative vetting process. And with the Christians, that's another reason that's just crazy and beyond me why we are not bringing in Christians, because they, number one, are victims of genocide, not just general migrants or opportunists for economic reasons, all of which are wonderful things, but they're actually facing a genocide of the entire community there. And it's very brutal and very violent. And they have baptismal certificates. They speak Neo-Aramaic, the language of Jesus Christ. I mean, you can't fake that.
Yeah. Do you support Turkey is making the offer of creating a safe zone in Syria for the Christians there, many of whom have already fled? Do you support that, or do you think it's too far out? These people have already dispersed.
Yeah, Raymond, I've been talking to a lot of refugees, Christian refugees, and many of them don't want to go back. They're deeply traumatized. They feel, and I've talked to several bishops, Bishop Jamo, a Chaldean bishop out in San Diego. He said that he said it right to me. He said that the culture has changed. It's a very extremist culture. ISIS has been teaching these kids now for several years the most horrible jihadist material and hatred against Christians. And the Christians have seen some of the local people buying the women at the slave markets. The UN wrote about that, by the way. Seeing them take down the crosses and seeing them looting their houses. There's not many of those Christians don't want to go back. They're deeply traumatized. They've lost loved ones. Everything they've owned has been taken from them.
I know a number of Christian leaders have asked for a meeting with Secretary Kerry and the State Department.
Yeah.
Those meetings have apparently been denied so far.
Right,
No
right.
acceptance, not even recognition the letter was sent.
The letter was sent on December 4th, and I was one of the signatories. So was Cardinal Wuerl, so was Carl Anderson of the Knights of Columbus, so was the head of the Pentecostal Assembly, so was Brian Catullis from the Center for American Progress on the left. So it was a real coalition.
Cross-section of people across the aisle. Here's the question. John Kerry met this week to discuss ISIS with Hollywood moguls about how to change the narrative. Is that a good use of his time?
No, he needs to meet with this group because what the purpose of the letter was to say, we want to brief you that there is the most heinous crime known to humankind is taking place against these minority communities, the Yazidis and the Christians. This group wanted to tell him about it and to tell him the limitations of even evidence gathering because it is still a war zone.
Now,
It's still dangerous.
Let's hope that meeting eventually takes place. Nina Shea, thanks for
Thank you,
awakening
Raymond.
us to what's happening
Thank
out
you.
there. And stay in touch. I know you are often in the region and in touch with people there. And
I will.
Your voice is
I will.
important. Thank you.
Definitely.